right, today we are going to take notes on some scientists that were instrumental in the study of evolution and how organisms change over time and how they gather the evidence that they needed to show that that evolution actually exists. So you can get your notes packet out and follow along, fill in what you need to. We're going to start with the father of evolution, who is Charles Darwin. He lived from 1809 to 1882. Darwin basically got on a boat for 5 years and sailed around the world. And what he did during this period of time was he took meticulous notes and drew pictures of everything, all kinds of living things, the way rock formations, the land formations. He just wrote down and journaled so many different things. His most famous work happened at the Galapagos Islands, which is an island off of a group of islands off of South America. He noted there that there are a group of animals that varied from island to island in very small ways. So turtles on one island would look slightly different on another island and look slightly different on another island. Or the beaks of birds, finches, that they would be different on one island compared to another island. And so he noticed that there are these organisms that looked alike, but then had slight differences or changes in them depending on what island that they were. And so Darwin kind of was convinced that organisms changed over time, and he really spent his life trying to figure out why and trying to figure out how that process occurs. So the development of new types of organisms from pre-existing organisms over time is called evolution. Really, evolution means changing over time. Some other scientific contributors to the field of evolution include George Cuvier. He is going to specialize in looking at rocks and how rocks layer themselves. He's also going to reconstruct fossils from old rocks, and he's basically going to say that organisms in the Earth's past were different than those now, and that some of them had actually become extinct. So he's going to kind of specialize in this idea of looking at fossils and how they changed over time. Charles Lyell is a geologist. He's going to propose that geological processes that changed the Earth in the past continue to do so now. So the different things, the weathering, erosion, those patterns that changed the Earth's surface, those things that happened way back when, at the beginning of the time, are still the same processes that are happening now, and that's called uniformitarianism. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck is the next one. This guy's kind of my favorite, even though he's completely wrong. But he supported the idea that populations changed over time, so he believed what Darwin believed. But he believed that organisms could acquire the traits during their lifetime, and Darwin did not believe this. So basically what he said was, if I wanted to fly as a human being, I could go stand on top of Mount Hosmer and flap my arms over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, and eventually I would be able to develop wings and fly just because I wanted to. And if I had children, then I would pass on the ability to fly or that wings to my offspring. So think of it another way. You go to the gym, you're working out, you're making yourselves as buff as can be, all right? Then you have all of these amazingly ripped muscles that you got from all of this exercise working out that you acquired. You acquired that muscle mass. Then Lamarck would say if you had babies, they'd all be ripped. Okay, and we know that that's totally not true. I cannot wish myself wings. I cannot flap my arms enough to develop wings. Okay, so traits are not acquired during a lifetime. Acquire means to get. You don't get traits in a lifetime. So Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, although it would be super awesome if he was right, was totally wrong, and his ideas were not accepted, but they were important in the discussion at the time. Next is Alfred Russel Wallace. He is going to form a theory on how evolution may take place. He proposed his ideas kind of at the same time as Darwin, but they did not work together. So both Darwin and Wallace are working on their ideas of evolution separately, but they are going to come together with some agreement on how this whole thing sort of works. And both of them are going to develop their idea from their voyages and their documentation from their trip around the world. When it comes to Darwin, we talk about something called descent with modification. And what this means is that he is going to say that all life comes from one or only a few original kinds of life. That's descent without modification. He's not the first to propose that organisms evolve, but he's going to be the first one that's going to describe it in this particular matter. So Darwin saw that there were 13 kinds of birds, or finches, that he observed on the Galapagos Islands, and he looked at their beaks. Okay, they all have this different shaped beaks, and this is going to be evidence of descent with modification. Okay, they all must have had way back when at some point a finch with a particular kind of beak. So let's just say it looked like beak 1. But over time, we end up with these different versions of finches that have different beak sizes. Even though they all are different, they originally would have evolved or started from a beak that looked like this. And so that's the idea of descent with modification. The second main part of Darwin's idea is natural selection. Okay? Natural selection is going to be the way evolution takes place according to Darwin. Okay? And there are 4 main forces that are going to drive natural selection. Sometimes we call natural selection survival of the fittest. Okay? But, so here's his 4 principles. Number 1, organisms are going to reproduce and produce more that can possibly survive. All right? We're going to produce more organisms that the environment can possibly hold. And when we reproduce, there's always going to be a genetic variation. So when we did the fish activity the other day, there was variation in all of the baby fish, all right? They all had the same structure. They all function pretty much the same, but there's variation, just like you guys. You have different eye colors. You have different hair colors. Structurally, you're all the same. Functionally, you all work the same, but there's variation among you, okay? All living things are going to have genetic variation. So number 3 is the struggle to survive. We, as living things, are all competing with each other to struggle for existence. Okay, plants are competing with other plants to struggle for existence. You know, ants are competing with other ants or insects to struggle for existence. Organisms are always struggling to survive. And then it brings us to number 4, differential reproduction. Organisms that have the best adaptations are most likely to survive and reproduce. And if they are surviving and if they are reproducing, they are passing those traits, the genetic variations that they have, to their offspring. And then they will also express those genetic traits. So those are kind of the 4 things. And we're going to talk a lot more about natural selection in the next couple days. Darwin sometimes uses the phrase survival of the fittest to describe natural selection. Basically, what he's saying here is that the environment puts pressure on organisms. We talked about this in class, okay? The amount of food available, the temperature of the environment, the size of the environment, the predators in the environment, okay? All of those things put pressure on an organism's ability to survive. So fitness is the idea that there are certain traits that are just natural variations that are going to make us better suited for a certain environment to survive. And if we are surviving, we are reproducing and we are passing those genes on then to our offspring. And so adaptation just refers to the idea that a change in a trait over population over time because of the ability to survive environmental pressures. So that is natural selection. You're going to be doing activity looking at how these traits may or may not be advantageous or an advantage in an environment or not, and what can happen when an environment changes, and how that affects variation's fitness or an organism's fitness. So you'll be doing a virtual lab looking at that.